It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ASUS VG28UQL1A. The buttons are located at the rear, towards the right side if you view it from the front. There's a joystick, there are 3 control buttons, and then that final button at the bottom there, that's the dedicated power button. There's also a cool white power LED that faces downwards towards the right side of the bottom bezel. You can't really see that from a normal viewing position though. If you press any of the buttons, except for that dedicated power button, then you get this little quick menu up. Also, if you twiddle the joystick left, right, up or down, you'll get the quick menu up. You then press the joystick in again to get into the main menu, the main OSD system. The second function there, it's X, so it's exit. And then the second and third functions, these buttons, they actually control what are referred to as shortcut keys, so you can configure them yourself. And you do that in My Favorites, so it's got that little star icon. So there's shortcut key 1 and shortcut key 2. You can have that set to various different things, as you can see here. I've got mine set to Favourite 1 and Favourite 2. That refers to these customized settings, so you can have 2 sets of your favorite settings. This means you can customize everything. I think it's actually everything, every single setting that you adjust in the OSD, that can be saved to setting 1 or setting 2, then you can quickly load that later. Or you can have the shortcut keys set to one of these various other options if you prefer. So the first section of the menu, actually it's the Tough Gaming icon, and it looks like it's just a little branding logo rather than part of the menu, or does to me anyway, but it is actually part of the menu, the gaming section. There's overclocking, that's grayed out unless using HDMI, and all that will do is it will give you a few more refresh rate options. Most notably, it will unlock 144 Hz. You do need to be using an HDMI 2.1 compatible system for that as well, to be able to use 144 Hz, but that's really the main purpose of this. Variable OD, variable overdrive, that's the pixel response time setting, the grey to grey acceleration level, various different levels there. They're explored in the review. Adaptive sync, you can enable that or disable that. If you're using DisplayPort, regardless of whether you're using an AMD or an NVIDIA GPU, the on state here, it's always marked as G-Sync compatible. Of course, if you're using an AMD GPU, you're not going to be using G-Sync compatible, it's going to be AMD FreeSync you're using. Regardless of whether you're using an NVIDIA or AMD GPU by HDMI, or you're using a system such as a games console with AMD graphics hardware, it's going to call it AMD FreeSync Premium. So even if you've got an NVIDIA system, it'll call it AMD FreeSync Premium. So don't worry about the labels. It also seems that the adaptive sync control controls HDMI 2.1 VRR as well. So if you have adaptive sync disabled, you can't use HDMI 2.1 VRR, even though technically that doesn't rely on adaptive sync. So this is really just the VRR control of the monitor more generally. Hopefully that makes sense. There's ELMB sync. I'm not going to go through this because all you'll see is flickering on the video, but this is explored in the review. This is the strobe backlight function of the monitor. Various different associated settings there, a few different clarity levels. There's clarity position. Again, this is all explored in the written review. And if you're using adaptive sync, then it's called ELMB sync, and you won't be able to change the clarity level. That will be grayed out, but you can still change the clarity position. Next, you've got GamePlus. So I'm just on Battlefield 5 at the moment, just so I can show you these settings in an in-game environment. So there's an on-screen crosshair. You can see it's just put a little red dot. Might not look red on the video. Let's show you the area of sky so it's a bit clearer. Just a little red dot in the middle of the screen. Or the various other designs, as you can see there. You can't customize these designs, it's just the ones that you're given here. There's an on-screen timer. You can have more than one of these on the screen at the same time as well. It's not just one or the other. And that's just displayed in the top left. Just counts down from the time that you set. And also just to note, if you want to quickly get rid of any of these, like the on-screen crosshair or the timer, you can just press the exit button twice. So that red X there, and it'll get rid of it, even if you're not in the main menu system. Alternatively, you can go to GamePlus and then untick the feature. There's FPS counter, so that's either a real-time FPS counter, as they call it. So that's displayed in the top right there. and that just displays a very large and very unmissable representation of the refresh rate. This does vary according to the frame rate if you've got adaptive sync active, and that's varying. So I'll just activate adaptive sync to show you this actually doing something. So you'll see it now fluctuates, moves around. So it's actually a refresh rate display rather than specifically a frame rate counter. So you do need to have VRR, variable refresh rate, active for this to be doing its thing. Otherwise it'll just show you the static refresh rate that you've selected for the monitor. The other option there allows you to show a little graph, to show you a little bit of frame rate history as well. So they call it dynamic frame rate graph. You'll see there, it shows a little graph so you can see when there are dips in frame rate as well. Next you've got display alignment, and that just puts various guidelines on the screen, all around the screen, to help you align multiple monitors. And the final function there, that's called Sniper, and what that does is it puts a little magnification into the center of the screen. You can have it set to 1.5 times, and it gives you a little crosshair of your choice, either red or green dot. So this is now zooming in the central section of the screen by 1.5 times. Or you can have 1.7 times. Or 2 times. And again with the choice of the red or green dot. You've then got GameVisual. These are the presets of the monitor, various different settings here. Racing mode is the default, and that's my preferred setting. These just make various changes to the image. You can see significant changes made to scenery mode, for example. It messes with the gamma curve and you can't change that. The options, it also oversaturates things, it just upsets the image in various different ways. If you like this look, then fine, use it, but if you don't, then you'll find that you can't actually counteract these changes. There's something called Vivid Pixel, which is a sharpness filter, and that's only available in some presets, so this might be a valid reason if you want to specifically use this setting for whatever reason. This might be a reason not to use the racing mode, just because it doesn't have this feature. There's also a saturation level slider, which isn't available in all presets. And that's a digital saturation boost, so if you increase this, it pulls shades closer to the edge of the gamut without expanding the gamut itself, so you lose shade variety, gives it a very cartoonish look, but some people do like that extra saturation, so that's fine if you do. If you decrease this, you can make things essentially monochrome eventually, or grayscale. But be aware that 50 is the neutral setting, but with some of these presets, things will still look oversaturated because of the changes it makes to the gamma as well, and various other things. So these presets are there if you want to use them. I'm not going to go through them all. They just make various different changes. Some of them unlock certain settings. For example, FPS mode, this makes everything look flooded, but it does essentially destroy your dark detail, which is useful from a competitive point of view, because you can now see things very clearly. Enemies are not going to hide from you in shadowy details with this setting, that's for sure. And part of what it does by default is it enables shadow boost. You can see that was set to level 3, so that's a strong setting. If you have this set to off, then there's still a gamma enhancement going on, so there's still actually rather good visibility in the dark regions, but the atmosphere is completely gone, things look wrong. But competitively speaking, this certainly does have some advantages. But you'll see the gamma's set to 2.2. But it's not 2.2, that's just the default setting. It makes various other changes to the curve which you can't override with the OSD. The sRGB mode, that is actually quite useful. That's an sRGB emulation setting which is explored in the review. MOBA mode, this is interesting. It makes most things monochrome, but it just highlights certain colours. So you can see there's sort of areas of orange and green towards the top, but most other colours are just displayed in grayscale. So back to my preferred racing mode setting, Shadow Boost. You can see this is available in racing mode. This is a gamma enhancement feature, a low-end gamma enhancement, and what it'll do is it targets these darker shades. It doesn't affect the black point, so it doesn't affect your contrast, which is good. It doesn't affect the brighter shades either, it's quite targeted towards these darker shades. There's various different levels of increasing effect. Dynamic adjustment, really think of that as level 4. It's supposed to increase its effect, I believe, depending on the content being displayed, but I've tested this quite a bit, and basically I found that it was just the most effective setting, whatever it was doing. So it does give you a nice boost where it's supposed to, without upsetting the image elsewhere. So it's quite a well implemented setting actually, but as I showed you, the FPS mode in general, if you want to really have a big boost, then you can use that. Alternatively, what you could do if you want to use racing mode and you want to have the big visibility boost, set this to dynamic adjustment for shadow boost, and this will have an effect on the lighter shades though. You can also change the gamma setting to 1.8, and that gives you a good level of visibility. And again, the black point remains the same, and so does the white point, so you're not affecting your contrast by doing this. Next, you've got image. You can change the brightness, the contrast, and this HDR. This is only available if you're running an HDR, so I'll just switch over to HDR now. When you do things like activate HDR and various other things, it does put this message on the screen which shows you things that are going to be disabled. I find that quite annoying actually, because it does it every single time and there's no way in the OSD to disable that, so I just thought I'd mention that. It actually gets a little bit annoying, especially for me because I change settings a lot as a reviewer. So I would have liked to be able to disable this setting. I don't need to know every single time I do something like activate HDR what it's going to be disabling. And it doesn't show you everything it will disable. You can actually see a lot of this is grayed out. So you can't use ELNB at the same time as HDR. The overclocking feature you can, but that's grayed out because I'm using DisplayPort anyway and it's not applicable. You can't change the GameVisual preset. Shadow boost isn't available. You can't adjust the brightness manually or contrast either. Vivid pixel. You see various things there's various other things grayed out here as well. You can't change the color channels either. However, you can change the HDR setting, but on my unit anyway, with my NVIDIA graphics card, these have no effect whatsoever. They're all exactly the same. With my AMD graphics card, it locked it onto console mode, and it would do the same if you're using a games console. That is intentional. It's also a bit weird, I have to say. So it locks it into this setting. The other two would be grayed out. So it's a little bit odd. It kind of shows you these settings which you can't use anyway with that system. So it's a bit of an odd implementation. But that's really all you can change under HDR, or in my case you can't really change anything because these do the same thing. There's also a dynamic dimming setting which you can enable or disable, which controls the local dimming feature of the monitor, which is explored in the review, and you can have that enabled or disabled under HDR. It's enabled by default under HDR. You can also have it enabled or disabled in SDR, and it's disabled by default. Back to SDR now. Blue light filter, various different levels here. Level 4 is the most effective. This is an effective blue light filter setting, particularly at level 4, but it imparts a rather strong green tint to the image as well. So I actually like making further adjustments, and when you activate this setting, you can then go to color temp, user mode, and then you can see what it's done. It's set the blue channel to 68, so it is significantly decreasing the blue channel, which significantly decreases the light output. Level 4 also locks your brightness, as explored in the review, but if you want to get rid of that green cast, you can just lower the green channel a little bit manually as well. And then remember that you can save your favorite settings to your My Favorites or whatever it was they were called. So if you have a certain setup with a lowered green channel as well as the blue channel and you want to save that, you can do so, and that's exactly what I've done, and that's what My Favorite 2 does. This is my preferred low blue light setting. Has a good amber tint, very effective blue light reduction. But you'll see that the green channel has also been reduced as well as the blue, which gives a nicer visual balance without that greenish yellow tint. You've then got color temp, which I just showed you. You can adjust the red, green and blue color channels manually, or you can set it to one of the presets, warm, normal or cool. So just to note that warm isn't a low blue light setting. It only makes the color temperature a little bit warmer than the usual settings. There's a gamma setting, 1.8, 2.2, 2.5, so there are 3 different levels here, not a great amount of flexibility. Also be aware that your unit is not necessarily going to coincide with exactly what the gamma shows here. Mine didn't. 2.5 is actually closest to 2.2 with my NVIDIA graphics card, all explored in the calibration section of the written review, so just be aware of that. It's really just a way you can raise or lower gamma. Saturation and skin tone. These are only available in certain presets. I've shown you saturation. Skin tone I didn't show you because that's only available in some of the other presets. So I'm just going to have to change this to, I think cinema mode is one of the ones that will unlock the skin tone. All this is it's it just allows you to bias certain shades towards a reddish, natural or yellowish tint. A bit of a strange setting, but if you want to do that according to your own preferences, you can do that. But remember, it's only tied to certain presets, such as the cinema mode, which makes all sorts of other weird adjustments and makes things look really odd, to be honest. You've then got input select, so you can select the input used by the monitor. You'll see the next section is grayed out. That's because it's the PIP, picture-in-picture, picture-by-picture setting, and that's grayed out if you have adaptive sync or VRR enabled. So you have to disable that to be able to use the PIP P-by-P functionality. So you can see various different layouts you can have for the picture-in-picture. So this will give you your main source for most of the screen and then your sub-source in a little window. You can see there are various different layouts, but this is just the top right. So if I had another device connected, it would be shown there in that window. The bottom setting there is picture-by-picture. So that gives you your main source beside your sub-source. PIP P-by-P source allows you to change the input used for your sub-source and your main source. Color settings, you can just change the preset used for your main source and your sub-source independently. PIP size, that's only applicable if you're using PIP. I'm using P-by-P at the moment, so I'll just switch over to PIP. You can have a small, middle or large box. Sorry that was masked by the menu, but that's the large box. That's the large box size there. And to disable it, you just select the first option there, which is the full screen. So that's just your normal non-PIP, non-P-by-P setting. Now I just realized there were some settings I didn't go through. ASCR, that's ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio, I think it stands for. That's a dynamic contrast setting. I just skipped over these because I actually kind of forgot they existed and didn't really pay attention to them just at the moment. But that's because you can only use them in certain situations. So for one thing, the GameVisual setting again needs to be set to something else to be able to use the ASCR, the Smart Contrast Ratio, the dynamic contrast feature. That's explored in the Vision Review. It's just like a normal dynamic contrast setting. The whole backlight changes as one unit isn't particularly useful. It's just a nasty compromise, really. And the fact that you need to have it set to what I feel are undesirable presets isn't helpful either. The aspect control setting, that's grayed out unless the monitor is actively using interpolation. It's upscaling, so it's scaling process. So to be able to use this, you have to have VRR disabled. You can't have adaptive sync, for example, used at the same time, or HDMI 2.1 VRR for that matter. And you also need to be running a resolution which it can use interpolation for, resolution and refresh rate, I should say. So this is a little bit complicated, to be honest, because there are some that just won't use interpolation, even when you might think they will, but it's actually going to just be using GPU scaling rather than the monitor's interpolation. A bit confusing, but a few that I know definitely work. So the full HD resolution at 120 Hz, and at 60 Hz it will work the same. So the monitor's using its own scaling. You can tell it's the monitor using the scaling rather than the GPU because it will actually show you the resolution and refresh rate there. So it says 1920 by 1080 at 120 Hz. This will mean that the setting I was trying to show you, aspect control, is available. Only a couple of options here though. So there's full, which will use all of the pixels of the monitor. And there's 4:3, which is only available if you're using a 4:3 aspect ratio resolution. And the 16:9 24-inch wide. So that will just simulate a 24-inch 16:9 experience. So the screen is smaller. You've got a black border around it and a little section for the image in the middle. I know this room's a little bit dark, so it's kind of difficult to see where it ends, but it's just where my hand is at the moment. So a reasonably large black border there. And if you recall, I said only certain resolutions and refresh rates will be using interpolation. So if you set this to a 5:4 resolution, for example, this one, 1280 by 960, you'll then see actually it says 920 by 1080 at 120 Hz. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to select it from the second list. These lists is just how NVIDIA presents things, but the first list there, that shows ones that are stored as TV resolutions in the EDID, Extended Display Information Data, of the monitor. If you're in a game, you would select the whole thing together. There wouldn't be two separate lists for refresh rates and resolutions. It would just be one continuous thing. Same with AMD or in Windows as well. It's just one continuous list. But NVIDIA just separates them out like this. So you'd have to select, well, let's say 144 Hz. I haven't actually tested that, so let's see if this works. You'll see it now says 2560 by 1440, so that's not right. It's not using interpolation there either. It's just set it to a different resolution and the GPU is handling the scaling. But if you set this to 100 Hz, I think it's exactly the same. That actually sets it to 3840 by 2160, 100 Hz. So you do have to be aware that only certain resolution and refresh rate combinations will allow you to use interpolation. But 60 Hz, fingers crossed, this should work. Yep, you'll see that the entire screen is now being used. And if you don't want it to use the entire screen, that's where your aspect control setting of 4:3. I do apologise if I said 5:4 at some point. I don't use these resolutions and aspect ratios myself, so they're not really ingrained into my brain. But there we go. It's not distorting the image. It's not stretching the image horizontally anymore. Next, you've got system setup. You can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. You can change the sound. You can change the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm headphone jack. You can mute that, and you can change the sound source if you're using PIP or P/P. There's eco mode. It'll try and enable this by default, or it'll give you a little dialog when you first use the monitor if you want to use this. And again, it's telling you that various things are going to be disabled when eco mode is turned on, and it does this every time you enable the setting. Eco mode isn't something that most people should concern themselves with. What it is it will lock various different functions, for example ELMB sync. It will also lock off a lot of controls on image, so you really can't change much at all. It's just designed to be a fairly low power consumption state where the backlight is locked to a fairly low brightness level, so it's not using too much energy, but you can achieve exactly the same thing without eco mode by simply lowering the brightness yourself and not using HDR a lot or not using high brightness settings. USB hub, that just allows you to set whether you want the USB ports to be usable when the screen is set to standby, or whether you want the USB ports to also shut themselves off. And the reason you'd want to have it off during standby is it will lower your power consumption. Even if you're not actively using the USB ports, if you have it set to on during standby, you will increase your standby power consumption of the monitor. So that's what that's for. It's not a huge increase, but it is an increase nonetheless, so there's no point in having it on during standby if you're not going to be using those USB ports during standby anyway. Power indicator, that allows you to enable or disable that power LED I showed you just before. Power key lock, that allows you to lock the power button. And I'm getting a bit nervous because it's the key lock setting. I have bad memories with these. People often ask about these in the video, so I'm just going to show you now. If you have this set to on, it does say keys locked, check quick start guide to cancel this function. And if I remember correctly, you just have to hold the joystick in for a while. I think it could be 10 seconds possibly. No, that's not right. So let's do this together. This here is the user guide. So if you press any of these buttons, it says key locked, really annoying, can't do anything. What am I supposed to do? The user guide of the monitor. You can then search for lock. Block, that's not very helpful. Overclocking, also not what I was looking for. Could probably have searched for key lock. It says there, press the down button for more than 5 seconds to disable the key lock function. So joystick down, and that's in the down direction, not pressed in, for 5 or more seconds. There we go, keys unlocked, magical. And I do apologise, that wasn't meant to be patronising. I genuinely didn't know how to do it myself, so I did have to check in the manual how to unlock the keys, and I do appreciate that it can be confusing when your monitor isn't responding to your key presses and you have no idea how to get the key lock disabled. OSD setup, OSD timeouts, you can set how long after the last button press before the OSD will automatically collapse in on itself, or you can just manually X. I didn't have to double click it, so I have no idea why I did that. You just have to press the X once to get rid of everything. DDC/CI, part of the plug-and-play functionality of the monitor allows you to use software to control it, and I'll show you some of that software called DisplayWidget Lite very shortly. Transparency. You can set the transparency level of the display according to your own taste. DisplayPort stream. You can have the DisplayPort set to 1.4 for the full functionality. Next is DSC, Display Stream Compression. That allows the full functionality via DisplayPort, so that will include full range RGB, 144 Hz, 10-bit signal if you want as well. But if you have this disabled, you'll have to use a reduced chroma or limited range RGB signal if you want 144 Hz, 3840 by 2160. If you aren't using a graphics card which has DSC, you can actually still just leave this enabled in the OSD. It doesn't really matter. It just means you're not going to be able to use these features anyway. If you have this set to off, it'll be exactly the same for you. There's no reason you'd want to disable DSC if your graphics card supports it. It's a visually lossless technology, has no visual impact at all. I've tested this a lot myself. Really no visual disadvantage to leaving this enabled. HDMI CEC, that's a certain standard. I'm not entirely familiar with it, but you can have that set on or off as well. Information, so that gives you some information about the monitor, such as the model name, the signal color depth as well, the signal format, the range, so just various information about the signal. If you're using HDR or not, that will change the EOTF display there as well. And then there's a setting to reset everything to the factory defaults. You'll also be aware when I was going through the video, there's a little bit of information in grayed out in grey at the top there as well. Now, the refresh rate displayed there, it does adjust if you're in a variable refresh rate environment, just like the FPS counter I showed you does. So that also adjusts. It's a little indication that the technology is working and doing what it should be doing. And I'm going to quickly show you DisplayWidget Lite. I say quickly because there isn't really a lot to go through here. It's fairly cut down in terms of its functionality, and there's a link to download this in the description of the video as well if you want to download this software. You can see there's various options there: brightness, contrast, saturation and hue. They would be grayed out. You can change the GameVisual preset as well at the top there very quickly. So I don't think the hue setting is ever available. I don't recall seeing that setting in the OSD. So I think that's just for other monitors or other models which do actually support this. So yeah, none of the presets actually have the hue control available, but the saturation is available in some of these, as I showed you earlier. Overdrive as well. These are labeled differently to how they are in the OSD. See, there's 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. So this corresponds to level 0, level 1, level 2, etc. ASCR, that setting. But you can see for yourself various different things. You can't control everything. Shadow boost as well. The blue light filter. You can change the red, green, and blue color channels manually as well if you want. There's a reset option as well, and compare with original settings. So if you've made some changes here and you want to reset it to the defaults, I think it's just these settings here which will be reset to the default. I'm not sure. I'm scared to actually press that just in case it overrides some other things. But compare with original settings, that's a press and hold thing. You can make various adjustments here, then hold this to quickly have a visual comparison. You can also quickly control the crosshair. Not very visible against this desktop background, but hopefully you can see that it is controlling the crosshair there. The on-screen timer as well, the FPS counter, display alignment, and the position of the crosshair. And that's interesting. You can change the crosshair position. That isn't something that you can do in the OSD, as far as I'm aware. I don't recall being able to change the crosshair position in the OSD. So that's quite interesting. It'll just be in the center of the screen usually. Yeah, no option there, and if you twiddle the joystick it doesn't move it either, it just gets the menu up, so interesting. That's a little unique feature with DisplayWidget Lite, it seems. But anyway, that's really all there is to that software, and also the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ASUS VG28UQL1A. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.